What is going on, gunfighters? Let's talk about little Magnums. Cartridges that still pack a punch, have impressive ballistics, impressive numbers, without the punishing recoil. Smaller than what you'd think of in your traditional Magnums, but I still think they'd qualify as small or light Magnums. That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, cartridges, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I'm blessed to serve you as host. First and foremost, I'm a Christian. I don't apologize for that. It's number one in my life and everything that I do, and the podcast is no different. Bio, bullet points in the show notes. With that, let's set some parameters. I'm not going to be talking about 22 calibers. I'm going to be talking about larger than 22 caliber, and I'm going to say less than 7mm rem mag. Because I think most people, when they think of Magnums, I don't think anybody would argue that a traditional Magnum would be a 7mm rem mag. You could argue which one's the best, 7mm rem mag or the 300 Win mag. But the fact is, both of those are like standard American Magnums. So we're going to be talking about less than the 7mm rem mag. At least as far as bullet diameter goes. As far as effectiveness goes, we could argue. Even with the 300 Win mag, we could argue. But let's talk about little Magnums. If we consider the standard 6mm American cartridge, or 24 caliber cartridges, the standard is the 243, and if you've listened for any length of time, you'll know my affinity and love for the 243. It's a phenomenal, light-kicking, capable, full-powered rifle cartridge. But that's not what we're talking about today. Let's talk about a Magnum in that, or a couple of Magnums in it. You may not know, but right around the same time that this came out, Remington came out with a 244 Remington, which later they would rename the 6mm Remington. If memory serves correct, it's based on a neck-down 7x57 case. It actually has more case capacity and arguably a little bit more potent than the 243 and the 6mm Remington. You generally, and as you find it in a really old rifle, will not see it marked 244 Remington. It'll be 6mm Remington. Now I'm going to look this up in Spear Reloading Manual number 14 because that's what I had handy. Now this was kind of an ill-fated cartridge because Remington twisted it with a 1 in 12. And Remington did this with a lot of cartridges back in the day, a 1 in 12 twist. I know they did this with a lot of cartridges. But this one, in the 6mm, meant it could not stabilize the heavier bullets that a 243 Winchester could. Even though with 75 to 90 grain bullets, it could outperform the 243. It says in the bottom paragraph of this manual, slightly larger case also permits a little more velocity, especially with 100 to 105 grain bullets. And published data in this manual lists a 70 grain bullet at 35.93 for just the first load listed. That's a pretty capable little 6mm. I'm going to briefly skip over the 243 WSSM Super Short Magnum as the firearms community glossed over it. Not a bad cartridge, but it really doesn't do anything the 243 or the 6mm Rem did not do. And it was ill-fated for other reasons. Now let's step up to the 240 Weatherby Magnum. Weatherby made some big, screaming Magnum cartridges. They are kind of the hot rod of cartridges back in the day. This one is no exception, but this one does not have the brutal recoil of many of the other Magnums in the Weatherby line. The 240 Weatherby Magnum, it lists a 70 grain bullet at 37.34. That's cooking. That's appreciably more velocity than the 243. And again, the 243 I consider a full-powered rifle cartridge. And it lists a 100 grain bullet at 32.09. Again, the 240 Weatherby Magnum is a true small Magnum. Now on the 25s, it's kind of debatable. Do you consider the 257 Roberts the standard? If so, the 25-06 would be a Magnum. And the 25-06 actually kind of performs like a small Magnum. But if we consider the 25-06 as our standard, and again, that's debatable because its numbers are impressive. an 87 grain bullet at 35.52 feet per second for the 25-06. If we look at my favorite Weatherby cartridge, the 257 Weatherby Magnum, it lists an 87 grain at 37.31. Published data. First load in the manual. 87 grain, 37.31. That is a screaming fast cartridge. And it lists a 100 grain at over 3,500 feet per second. That's like varmint high velocities with a capable medium game-sized bullet. The 257 Weatherby Magnum is a true small magnum. And it has, when I looked it up in the recoil calculator, it had comparable recoil, maybe even a little less than a 30-06. And a 30-06 is kind of the standard for what I think most men can handle in a good practice session. Not setting it in on a lead sled, but like practicing shooting in practical positions. Which means if you can do it with a 30-06, you should be able to do it with a 257 Weatherby. It says here in this manual, the 257 Weatherby is based on a belted 300 H&H Magnum case, neck down and shortened to operate through the standard 30-06 length actions. It also says here the 257 Weatherby has established a strong reputation for an accurate long-range cartridge for medium game. It says here the 120 grain Grand Slam can be used on larger mule deer and in the hands of a good rifleman passes for an elk cartridge. So a very versatile light Magnum here. And it lists that 120 grain at 32.36 feet per second. Now, if we consider the standard 6.5 millimeter, the 6.5x55 Swede, in modern pressure loadings, like the 6.5 Creedmoor is the standard today, but the 6.5 Creedmoor is not more powerful than a loaded to similar pressure 6.5x55 Swede. 6.5 Creedmoor is a fantastic cartridge. A very mild-mannered, well-balanced cartridge. Very accurate cartridge. But outside of today's scope, let's talk about something more powerful than the 6.5x55 Swede or the 6.5 Creedmoor. There is very obscure the 6.5 Remington Magnum, but those are really hard to come by. They're impressive ballistics, but look that up on your own if you're interested. I don't think there are many of those shooters out there. A classic that was very good that has not really stood the test of time is a 264 Winchester Magnum. It says the Winchester Model 70 chambered for the new cartridge was appropriately named the Westerner. The flat trajectory and high retained energy of the 264 was well suited to the demands of Western hunting. That's from the manual. If we look here, it lists a 120 grain bullet at 32.36 feet per second. And 140 grain at over 3,000 feet a second. Those are impressive ballistics, especially for the 1950s. Wonderful ballistics. And a lot lighter kicking than something like the other Magnums Winchester introduced at the time, like the 338 and the 300. Ironically, this one, which I think is probably the best balance of them, did the least as far as standing the test of time, but it's a phenomenal cartridge. There is one that's a lot more common today, the big brother of the 6.5 Creedmoor, and that's going to be the 6.5 PRC. And that one is so new that it's not in my manual, so I'll have to look at it from a different source. To give credit where it's due, let's go with a source of Outdoor Life to give credit where it's due. It says it was unveiled in 2018, so this is a very new cartridge, especially considering all the ones we've talked about. This says, the author here says he got a muzzle velocity of around 2,900 feet per second with 143 grain ELDX. And that's going to be considerably faster than if you consider the standard of a 6.5 Creedmoor. I would consider the 6.5 PRC like a very small, lightweight Magnum. Not quite the powder burner that, your bigger, older Magnums we talked about. It's going to be a little bit newer in design if you care about that. But it, I think, deserves a shot in there for the small Magnums, the 6.5 PRC. There is an even newer one by Weatherby. Now they have the old 6.5 300. Going to skip over that today. I don't think it's super common, even compared to some of these fairly obscure calibers we're talking about. They have a new one that may catch on, the 6.5 Weatherby RPM. For this one, we'll go straight to Weatherby. RPM stands for Rebated Precision Magnum. It lists a Barnes 127 grain at 32.25. That's pretty Magnum. It'll list 140 grain Accubon at 30.75. Not quite as beefy and overboard as the 6.5-300. It lists here on the same page, just if you're interested, it lists the 6.5-300 as 140 grain at 33.95 feet per second. That might be getting up there into Magnum recoil territory. You have to run your own numbers on that. But both the 6.5 PRC and the 6.5 RPM, good modern takes on a small Magnum cartridge in my opinion. Okay, now let's move up to an American classic. We love our 30 calibers, but if there's like an American oddball that we have embraced, that is going to be the 277 caliber, as in the 270 Winchester. And if the 270 Winchester is no slouch, but if we consider the 270 Winchester our standard, now there's a few of these that stand out to me that would fit into this category without getting into Magnum recoil, and that's going to be both the 6.8 Western and the 277 Fury. None of these have exactly taken the market by storm, but not because they're bad cartridges. The 277 Fury, when it is mass adopted by the military, if and when it is mass adopted by the military, it probably will do better on the civilian side. That's generally what happens. We look at things like the 9mm, the 45 ACP, 223, 308. Whatever the military uses generally does pretty well aftermarket civilian side as well, assuming it has a decent run. It's not always the case like the 3040 Krag. Anything that has a decently long service life generally does pretty well on the civilian side. So let's start first with the 6.8 Western. Also too new to be in the manual. Go to Wikipedia for this one. It lists a 165 grain bullet at 32.26 feet per second. Now, you might notice something. That's a lot heavier than your traditional 270. And part of the thing they wanted to push with this was these new, long, sleek, high BC bullets. That doesn't mean you could not hand load your traditional 130s, or 140s, or 150s that you would get in a 270. You absolutely could. But if we look at these numbers, 165 grain, which is the lightest they list here, at 32.26, those are respectable numbers. That's also going to push you into kind of Magnum recoil territory. We're right on the cusp here of what I would consider a light Magnum. This might just be considered a Magnum, but I'm going to throw it in here anyway. So let's 175 grain at 28.35 feet per second. Now the 277 Fury, the big claim to fame for this one is its bimetal case, which, if you don't know, has a steel base on it which allows higher pressure. Was the first SAMI cartridge I'm aware of rated to 80,000 psi. A fairly high pressure cartridge in most traditional rifle cases is 65,000 psi, and that's again pretty high. This one is 80,000 psi. We go to the wiki for this one. This one is brand new. It's still in the process of being adopted. It says design 2019, so we're talking very new, by Sig Sauer. I also see it referred to by its military designation, 6.8 by 51. And you're going to see two different kind of loads for this. You're going to see a traditional brass case load, which is really nothing to write home about and not a Magnum at all. One could argue whether it's a light Magnum or not, but with the 80,000 psi loads, I think you would honestly say that it is a Magnum. This one in the hybrid case, 155 grain bullet at 3,000 feet per second, even. 155 at 3,000 in a hybrid match. And you might think those aren't that impressive. However, most of the aforementioned ballistics we've talked about are probably in a 24 or even longer barrel. This is out of a 16-inch barrel, which is where that 80,000 psi in the bimetal case comes in. It allows you to get those high velocities with a shorter barrel. So 155 grain bullet, 3,000 feet per second, out of a 16-inch barrel, if you wanted to put it in a traditional hunting length barrel, it would only do better. So those are pretty impressive numbers, and I would consider it a light Magnum. You know, if you consider the old and very good 308, generally you think about a 308 with a 150 grain bullet at 2,800 feet per second. But that's out of a much longer barrel. That's out of like a 20-inch barrel. We're talking a 155 at 3000 out of a 16-inch barrel. So yeah, I would consider it kind of a light Magnum. Recoil is not going to be horrible on this round. And it's 277 Fury or 6.8 by 51. And it's a pretty cool cartridge, and I think that's where we're going to draw the line here for the light Magnums. There's some good options to choose from. Now let me talk a little bit about the philosophy of light Magnums in general. You might think, well, wouldn't I just get a light Magnum? It's not punishing recoil. It's kind of a hot rod. I get more velocity. Why wouldn't I just do this? Sounds like a great idea. Well, just hold on there a second, cowboy. For everything that you gain, you're giving something up. Like many other things in the firearm world, there's no free lunch. One is cost. If you're going to practice a lot, these are going to be a lot more expensive to practice with. If we go back to look at an example we threw out there of the 6.5 Creedmoor versus the 6.5 PRC. Go look at what you can get good affordable ammo in both calibers for, and you're going to see it's much more affordable to practice with 6.5 Creedmoor than 6.5 PRC. If we take the standard vanilla 308, something like the 277 Fury is going to be a lot more expensive to practice with. So there's an actual cost in, U.S. greenback dollars. There's also a cost in wear out of the firearm. Again, there's no free lunch. You start pushing rounds at higher velocities with higher, if it's not higher pressure, higher amounts of powder. Generally, you're going to wear out barrels faster. Especially when you talk about smaller bores with high powder capacity, these tend to be some of the more atrocious barrel burners. Should this be a no-go? Well, it depends. How much are you going to shoot it? If it's a 257 Weatherby Magnum that's only for your, antelope hunting rifle, when you're drawing a very coveted tag, you're probably never going to put enough rounds through that thing to notice. It's going to be your go-to practice rifle that you're going to shoot all the time. You probably don't want it in 257 Weatherby Magnum. You might want another rifle to practice with, and then when it comes time for like a premium hunt, go to the 257 Weatherby Magnum. Also, just finding the ammo sometimes for some of these calibers. Like, when's the last time you saw a 264 Win Mag just on a shelf? And I'm not saying it's a no-go again. You want to reload. You want to buy your ammo online ahead of time. You're not the kind of person that's going to run out of a go-to hunting ammo or whatever you're doing with this caliber ammo. Then there you go. Like, you can go to Walmart and get some fairly good 308 loads. You can't go to Walmart, as far as I'm aware, I've never seen it, and get 277 Fury ammo. That may change in the future, but as of right now, you're probably not going to find it. Probably not finding, 6.5 Weatherby RPM at Walmart. And maybe that doesn't matter to you, but maybe it does. So, these do offer some real tangible benefits as far as ballistics go, but they also offer some real-world challenges as far as expense of burning out a rifle or a barrel, the ability to find and get ammo readily. So just be honest with yourself. Maybe you just want it. And if you just want it and you have the disposable income, go for it. I'm not your wife. You don't have to justify your gun purchases, ammo purchases to me. But if you look at it practically, are those added benefits of the better ballistics compared to the standard, are they worth the trade-off? Sometimes the answer is yes, but often the answer is no, which is why the standards are the standards. The standard 308, the standard 6.5 Creedmoor, the standard 270. Those are great cartridges, and for most people, they're probably the better option. Just being honest with you. But if you're in that minority that either just wants it or you want, or can actually reap some real tangible benefits, not pie in the sky, dreaming up one day scenarios, but like actual tangible benefits for you and your general use, then yeah, they may be worth it for you. So just some thoughts on Magnums and light Magnums. Hey guys, I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you. If you've listened for any length of time, I really appreciate you and all that you do. Your tactical tip of the day, these cartridges in particular, or cartridges like them, they're going to have a higher cleaning regimen to maintain accuracy than a standard cartridge. This applies to any cartridge. One of the rules of thumb to remember when you're going to clean your rifle, do no harm. Sometimes you can do more damage by cleaning your rifle than if you just didn't clean it at all. Like cleaning it with a cheap aluminum 3-piece cleaning rod, or cleaning it from the muzzle end, or not using a crown protector, all kinds of things. So remember, when you're going to clean a rifle, first do no harm. Probably better off to not clean it for a while until you get the proper stuff than to force something and really potentially damage your firearm or the accuracy of your firearm. So do no harm when it comes to cleaning. It's a good rule of thumb, which is going to bring us to the tactical verse of the day. Also, you shall destroy all the peoples whom the Lord your God delivers over to you. Your eye shall have no pity on them, nor shall you serve their gods, for that will be a snare to you. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.